Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am Bernard Beitman, MD, your host. I'm a psychiatrist. I study the mind and the brain in its physical and cultural contexts. Meaningful coincidences like synchronicity and serendipity provide clues to how our brains and minds work. Well, what I find is that our brains and minds are deeply connected to other people, to nature, and our environment, as well as our bodies. Now, they ain't these separate islands that we've been taught to believe. Separateness is a fine delusion because it's so convincing, but it's not true. Meaningful coincidences occur in all aspects of human life. You just need to expect them. They're around. It's just that we've been trained not to pay attention to them. I am the founder of the Coincidence Project. The Coincidence Project is composed of 15 coincidence ambassadors who are synchronicity experts from around the world. Each coincidence ambassador has appeared on this show. Our primary mission is to encourage you to tell each other your coincidence stories. Why? Because synchronicities illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unify us. Yes, synchronicities illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unify us. You can join us, the Coincidence Ambassadors, on Clubhouse, which is primarily an audio-only conversation platform. You can download the Clubhouse app to your phone. Our club, the Coincidence Project, meets every Friday for an hour beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Come visit us and tell us your coincidence stories. Remember, that's 1 p.m. every Friday on Clubhouse. And please like and subscribe to us on the buttons below. It really helps get the messages out. Our guest today is Cassandra Vieten, who is Director of Research and Associate Scientist at the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at the University of California, San Diego. She is also Executive Director of the John W. Brick Mental Health Foundation and a Senior Fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where she served as President from 2013 to 2019. Welcome to the show, Cassie.
Great to see you. Thank you.
You're welcome. And you've told me you've got hundreds and hundreds of them, these coincidence stories. Why don't you tell us one of your best ones?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, when I say I have hundreds, I definitely have hundreds from my life, but I've also got hundreds from all of the people that we have studied, primarily through my work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where we talk to people about transformative experiences that changed their lives to ones that were more rich with meaning and joy and purpose. So one of mine that I remember quite clearly, that was probably one of my first big ones, was I was in school becoming a psychotherapist, at least I thought at the time. And I was taking a class in sand tray. And if you've ever heard of that, it's a Jungian-based kind of a play therapy, although it's also for adults. And it involves having a literal tray of sand in the middle of the room and having shelves that are full of miniatures that kids or adults will arrange in the sand tray. And rather than interpreting it, the psychotherapist will help the participant explore what these things might symbolize. And over the course of weeks, you see this interesting increasing coherence or integration of these sand tray scenes that people do. So I was in the sand tray training class, and part of the training was to work with each other. And they asked, choose one of the figures off the shelves, and there were probably 1,000 figurines. And I chose this little figurine that looked like a mythical creature. It had the legs of a lion and the head of an eagle and wings. I didn't know what it was called at the time. So I put it there, and, the therapist said, this is a griffin and this is a mythological figure. So the body of a lion, the wings and head and beak of an eagle. So we talked a lot about that. And at the time I was trying to make a decision about something a practice that I was wondering if I should join in or not. I was kind of back and forth. And so we talked about this little symbol. And as we continued to talk about it, I thought, wow, this is really leaning toward making me want to say yes to this decision. So I left the room, opened the door, got in my car, and a gigantic Mack truck, semi-truck, blocked my way. And on the side was emblazoned a gigantic griffin with the words underneath, Griffin Industries. And I thought, okay, that is my sign. I think it's a definite yes.
Yeah. The eagle and the lion are symbols in astrology and mythically, as you're talking about. The two of them are both in astrology fixed signs. The lion, the fixed fire sign, and the eagle, one of the Scorpio variations, a fixed Scorpio thing. So whether or not you put it together with astrology, but to have those two ancient symbols right there together for you, smash in front of that truck, gets me to wonder what meaning that particular griffin had besides confirmation that you should make that decision.
Yeah, I can't remember all of it, but it definitely had something to do with the grounding on earth, and then the open, the sort of wisdom of the heavens, having a bird's eye view and being able to see for miles and see patterns, but also staying very grounded on the earth. Also symbols of strength and freedom and things like that. So liberation.
Liberation, yeah. Liberation while having your feet on the ground. And
yeah,
what better description of the kind of work you do?
Right.
Because you're grounded in regular research and have your mind out there in imagination and other places. So it's
yeah. For some reason, I've always been very driven to take these vast and metaphysical, mystical, enchanting experiences and then apply the scientific method to them. And throughout my career, I've been told by scientists, you can't do that. Those topics are unscientific. And I've been told by the mystics, you can't do that. You can't reduce these things into a spreadsheet or a set of numbers. And I believe both of them, and yet I feel completely driven to do it, which for me has unlocked a lot of interesting understandings, or theories at least, about the nature of reality and human potential.
One of my favorite phrases, the nature of reality. That's why I'm into the coincidence business, because coincidences have, for much of humankind's history, served as ways to figure out what's going on around here. It's like, okay, those two things happen. Maybe there's some relationship between the two of them, even though I didn't expect it. And that also reminds me of the phrase, the aims of religion and the methods of science. And that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and of course, overused, but the quote I attributed to Einstein that, science without religion is dead and religion without science is lame, or something along those lines. But that these ways of knowing the world, the external way of knowing the world and the internal way of knowing the world, these are two sides of the same coin. They don't live in different parts, you know, they're really connected.
You're implying, and I think correctly, that mystics tend to be inner-directed, involved.
Yeah, and you know, I think some mystics tend towards the more transcendent, where the body and the world is sort of a inconvenient illusion, you know, that needs to be transcended. And others are extremely embodied. And I think I tend towards the second, at least in this incarnation, that we have bodies, we have a world, we have life, and that there's something meaningful about having those things. It's not so much about getting out of it, you know. But I heard a great definition the other day that I was surprised I'd never heard before, which was invisible, meaning visible in, visible within.
And what does one see when with visible in? What are you referring to?
Well, I guess I mean that there's this interior. So, you know, I worked with the Noetic sciences, and Noetic is a Greek word that means the inner form of knowing, intuition, gut feelings, hunches, and the subjective experience, anyway, of the world inside of us. And this relates to imagination as well. The world inside of us is at least as vast as the world outside of us. The territory of consciousness is at least as vast as the territory of physical reality. And yet we often, you know, see exploration of physical reality as very important, and exploration of interior reality as imaginary, you know, sort of invisible, like these things are not real, they're not important, they are not causal. And I think some of this frontier research is beginning to show, and well-established mind-body medicine research, that what happens in the interior, in our minds, in our consciousness, absolutely affects our own body. It affects our behavior. It affects the people we're around, and it may even affect the physical world.
Now, what about that last part?
Well, you know, you're going to have Dean Rayden on next. So he's going to be one of the world's leading experts in talking about this. I'm more expert in the idea that our belief, our intention, the stories that we tell ourselves change the way our body is functioning. They change the functioning, the default mode functioning of the brain. They can change the structure of the brain when we start to tell ourselves different stories or pay attention in different ways. This is well understood research from, let's say, the mindfulness literature, where we know right now that if we sit and pay attention to our breathing and our body sensations for 20 minutes a day, in other words, we turn our attention inward, that changes the function of the brain. It changes even the structure of the brain, the density of neurons, our hormones, our immunity levels. And so this is telling us, with a very simple practice of changing the way we pay attention and turning it interiorly for, is that a word? Turning it toward the interior for even just a few minutes a day makes a big difference. So what other frontiers might there be in consciousness? I'm also working right now with the Psychedelics and Health Research Initiative at UC San Diego. And of course, many, many people have described exploration of consciousness through psychedelic agents as, you know, finding whole worlds of inside that they had never encountered before.
And how does the Arthur C. Clarke focus on imagination fit?
Well, yeah, I've been so lucky because, as you know, the Institute of Noetic Sciences was founded by Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who was the 6th person to walk on the moon. And somewhat before that, and really confirmed by his flight back from the moon to Earth, he had a deep understanding of the absolute crucial need to understand consciousness, that when you look at how people treat each other on the planet, it mostly comes from how we view things. And when we have a mistaken or limited view of how things work, then we have unskillful ways of behaving towards the planet and towards each other. So I got to work with Edgar pretty closely and became friends, and that was really wonderful. He passed away a few years ago now. And when I left IONS, I thought, well, I don't know if I'll ever find anything as cool as that. And then I found the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination, which was initially created by the Clarke Foundation. Most of your listeners will recognize Arthur C. Clarke as the author of 2001, A Space Odyssey, one of the greatest science fiction books and movies of all time, but also 50 other science fiction novels. And in many of those, there were visions of the future or visions of parallel universes, where not only were there these amazingly creative ideas and speculations about what could be, but also leading to very real inventions. And so, Clarke discovered the Clarke gravitational orbit and things that ended up being true in physical reality. So the Center at UCSD for Human Imagination really looks at the fundamental role that imagination plays in advancing human progress and evolution. We know that we need our imaginations. Almost every innovation, every discovery, every building that was ever built started in someone's imagination. Every solution to a major societal problem started in someone's imagination. So you could say that imagination is our most valuable natural resource. And yet there's just not a lot of attention to it in science or in education. In fact, our education system sort of kind of works often to make children less imaginative by these, standardized tests. And there's only one out of these 4 answers. And so, we really want to elevate imagination as this crucial human skill and resource.
Oh, that's wonderful. How do meaningful coincidences and imagination fit together for you?
Well, first of all, I think many people, when they hear about meaningful coincidences or synchronicities, would say that's just a coincidence. It's meaningless, and it may even be imaginary, and imaginary in that sense having a pejorative meaning, saying it's not real, it's false, it's fake, it's imaginary. When these things that a lot of people have synchronicities that do take place in their imagination or in their deeper consciousness. So sometimes it's like the one I shared, where the griffin was the figure in the sand tray and the griffin was the picture on the truck. But much more often, people just are thinking about something that they haven't thought about in a long time. I'm thinking about elephants, and this time I went riding on an elephant in India, and then I'm watching the news and all of a sudden there's a special on elephants. These things happen very often between the imagination and the external world. And so I think it's absolutely fundamental to understand that the realm of imagination might be a very powerful link to the external world. And these coincidences might be trying to give us clues, like, hello, it's linked, like every time it happens, that there's like a chink in the matrix and it's trying to tell us, hey, there's something bigger going on here. And
Yeah, it is. And that they illuminate the invisible currents that connect and unite us, not only with each other, but with our natural world.
Mhm.
And you're talking about a subset of like media mind connections, which are happening more often than before, because there's more media out there and we're influenced. So the media and like social media tends to like put in front of our minds what we've already been looking for. Now, oh, look at the surprise. So making the distinction between what they're trying to get us to buy,
Right.
versus something that really means something to you that kind of happened out of no place,
Right.
is like I was trying to figure out a way of understanding what I call human GPS, which
Yeah.
is psi-mediated instrumental responses from Rex
Mm.
Stanford's kind of work,
Mhm.
where psi abilities allow you to get where you need to go without knowing how you got there. You kind of intuitively get there where you need to go. So I was trying to figure that out from how the brain might help me understand it. And then I was stuck with that, and I'm writing this first book, and there was, look at the New York Times online, and there are grid cells in the hippocampus that have something to do with location and physical space that helps rats move around, and you could expand that to other people. So sometimes you get information that you're really looking for, like Library Angel was the old name for it. And they happen all the time. So the idea that you're saying that there is much more connection between our minds and external reality. It's not external as much as we think it is.
Right.
And that's, we got to get to that. We got to get to believe that. But you've run into a lot of people not wanting to think that there is that connection. The favorite ones are statisticians, particularly, who know it's all random and have their ways of talking about the law of very large numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's upon us who are fascinated by this topic to also bring a critical perspective to it, just like you just said, that, you know, even some, you know, patterns of mental suffering, you know, mental disorders can be grounded in people seeing too many connections that are not really there. So there can be a painful shadow aspect to imagining connections that are not real. However, it seems clear to me from the number of stories that I've heard, we're talking in the hundreds, maybe even thousands, and my own experiences, that there is something going on here. And there hasn't been anywhere near enough science yet to look at this. And problematically, the kind of science that needs to be done costs money. And it's very difficult to get grants for this kind of work because it's controversial. And that's why I think the Institute of Noetic Sciences is so important, that it's always on the frontier, really looking at this stuff. Nowadays, we can do more citizen science, which is, you know, if you're not familiar with the term, it comes from people who are mostly naturalists who are outside in their yard, and we say, you know, hey, would you mind counting the number of geese that go overhead for the next 2 hours so that we can get a clear sense of the size of the migration? But we can also do this in the inner world. And so there's some very interesting new, you know, mobile technologies and online technologies that let people report on their synchronous experiences. Problematically, we have to rely on people's subjective understandings, and that makes science tricky to do, but it doesn't make it impossible.
That's why I like to collect stories.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for money support to look for patterns in the hundreds and hundreds of coincidence stories that I have that are out there. They have to be collected, and then look for those patterns. Because even though there's, you know, there's going to be a variation, a bell-shaped curve at least, of stuff that's going to be right and stuff that's going to be right on and stuff that's going to be off. But looking for the patterns will help us see just what is going on out there. That's science.
Yeah, and from a true science perspective, you know, we should pay attention to anomalies that are in conflict with the current way we see reality, instead of sort of ejecting those as noise or erratic things that don't mean anything. But as scientists, we also have to be open to the possibility that these are meaningless coincidences. And that's a hard place to be in when you have personal convictions, when you know that you've had these experiences. The way I resolve that in my own mind is science is not the only way of knowing the nature of reality. Science is one way of knowing about the nature of reality. And so I personally think it's fantastic that you're doing this work. And it is the beginnings of any scientific endeavor. We take a natural history approach where we collect hundreds and hundreds of stories and we try to look for patterns in those stories. And that helps us generate scientific hypotheses that then we can test in more controlled conditions.
Yeah, and that's what I've done with the second book on meaningful coincidences, is as best as I could, collected the patterns. I like the introductory courses at Swarthmore. That's what went to school, and because they gave you a broad overview, and that's what this book is intended to be, as a seedbed for potential patterns to be analyzed in more detail and more rigorously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's interesting is, these ideas have been investigated for millennia, and before Descartes, I would say for most of the developed world, science and mysticism were connected. There wasn't really a big difference between how people look to know reality. So when you look at Hindu theories, for example, of how reality works, they talk about Indra's net or Indra's web. That is a sort of like a three-dimensional spider web that moves in all directions. And each point where the threads of the spider web meet is a little jewel or a little dewdrop. And when one aspect of the spider web is moved, everything in the spider web is moved. And I've always loved that metaphor because it does seem to me to be a good way of sort of looking at interconnection between people and objects, and the idea that sometimes we're sort of on the thread, and when we're on, let's say, our life's purpose, or we're in alignment with what the universe wants to happen, or let's even just say we're in alignment with our values and goals, there tend to be more of these connections and synchronicities. And when we're sort of off our path, when we're in the middle between, we're not on any of the threads, we can feel really not connected at all. So I do tend to use these synchronicities as sort of guideposts. Now that's all very theoretical and subjective, but people like Dean Rayden and others are beginning to do studies on, can we, if we have that as an underlying theory that there's some fabric of reality, and let's say, using a literal fabric analogy, if you think of a tablecloth and you pull up one part of the tablecloth and that's a little peak, let's say we are all peaks of this tablecloth. You are Bernard, I am, but we're still connected by this underlying fabric. So every now and then something will happen in your mind and I'll be able to perceive the same thing, or something will happen in the external world and it'll connect to my world. And so I think these are fascinating ideas that should be, they suggest hundreds of possible experiments that we could do to try to test those.
Conceptualizing Indra's net and the tablecloth, other people have used islands that were connected underneath. I'm proposing the use of the word psychosphere. And calling it, because it's our mental atmosphere, and we give ideas and energy out into it, kind of like moving a jewel around, and we also take it in, and we're all, it's like an ocean that we are all like participating in without knowing it. And that has connections like Indra's web that coincidences help to illuminate.
I like that. Yeah, that's great.
Well, good, because I mentioned to you in one of our emails the idea of the collective human organism, And the post I'm writing now for Psychology Today is called, "Is Humanity Committing Suicide?" It's not said that directly that I could see. Someone, and one of the things I'm learning is if I thought of it, somebody else has thought of it already. So, or is going to think about it. That's happened to me several times with the word like psychosphere.
Sure.
It's been around, but I just saw a post that listed a history of it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
it's humbling.
oh, it's reinforcing because
Absolutely. Yeah.
because I don't claim it as my
Mhm,
imagination only.
mhm,
I think what we're talking about as imagination is imagining the real. That's what Arthur C. Clarke could
mm,
do. That may
mm.
be imagining the future, but imagining the real.
Yeah, yeah,
And what's real becomes something that we can like figure out, but we get an idea
yeah.
from coincidences that can maybe tell us something. So the
Right.
idea I have, and that's what I'm curious about, imagining where you are, imagining that we are all a part of a collective human organism that is humanity or humankind. And we are, because we're doing, we're destroying our habitat, which not too many animals do. And that's what we're doing. And I think of it as an addiction to material consumption, much like an alcoholic is drinking, 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 and destroying what's around him or her, and not paying attention to people saying, no, you got a problem here. So I'm interested in defining the cells of this human organism, which coincidences can help us do, because what is your role, Cassie? What is my role in this? Where do we fit into this organism of which we are a part, if we recognize it, with our individuality, as well as our contributions to the whole thing?
Yeah, I do think that synchronicities and
Your,
coincidences,
go ahead.
I think they can serve
Your
to,
sound is getting a little strained.
oh, that's odd.
Keep going, but it's going
Yeah,
there.
how's this now?
Yeah,
Let me see.
you're okay now.
Okay, good. Let me know if it changes again.
Okay.
So, I think these synchronicities and coincidences can often change people's worldviews and perspectives. And most of the time, if people aren't kind of hip to them, they just ignore them. They say, oh, that was weird, or that was a strange coincidence. But then sometimes they can really break through the sleeping the dream. They can break through being asleep, and someone says, okay, look, now that is so meaningful. That coincidence is so meaningful. I cannot any longer ignore that something about what I've been taught about how things work, this mechanistic view and this separatist view, dualistic view, is not true. And there was you probably know about Michael Shermer, who is a sort of professional skeptic. He's very skeptical mind. I think he is like the chair of the Skeptics Society or the editor of Skeptics Magazine. And so he had been for years and years, trying to fight the good fight of, anti metaphysical, not taking, not letting metaphysics contaminate society. And his wife's father passed away, and he was either on his way to the funeral or on his way back from the funeral. And he went into his office and he kept hearing this music or this sound, and he could not figure out for the life of him what was going on. He checked his phone, his TV, his radio. So finally he noticed it was coming from a drawer in his desk, and he pulled it open, and it was old transistor radio that his wife's father had given him, that he had always meant to kind of fix or tinker with. It hadn't worked, and now it was just playing. And to give Michael Shermer credit, he wrote an article on this and kind of confessed, like, look, I've been a skeptic, but even I cannot ignore this. Like, that I can't explain.
It turned, the thing turned on at the moment they were getting married.
Is that right? Yeah.
Because his wife, wanted her grandfather to be there
I
and
see.
to
That was
give
the
her
story.
away.
Good, good.
So it
Yeah.
made it even more entropic
Yeah.
in the improbability of it.
Yeah.
And it did change his mind for a while, but then he kind of backed away
Oh
from it.
yeah. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Yeah. But I thought it was good that he at least wrote an article about it and said, okay, look, I've had one too now, you know.
Yes, he had. He's had a bunch of them, but he's had a.
Mhm.
But we can't really do guys like him. I mean, one of the things that I've recognized is people have fixed beliefs,
Mhm. Mhm.
and more often, the older they get, the more fixed they get. It's not
Mhm.
only that, but they
Mhm.
get fixed beliefs.
Mhm.
So I'm in the business of recognizing when I'm talking to someone who's going to say, no, I don't think what you're talking about is right. It's not my view of things. And that's what I'm talking about with the collective human organism. I don't want to think that I am committing suicide by the way I am acting. It's a huge denial despite the evidence. And we're showing evidence in that direction with your work, the Noetic Sciences work, that there is a connection between our mind and what's around us, with our collective minds and what's around us. And that's the big leap that we're all trying to break down.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think you're on the right track. And there's also sort of the flip side, which is we've sort of disenchanted our world to an extent. And I feel so lucky that I get to be in these very privileged settings, these rarefied settings where we're talking about imagination and space and the stars and astronauts and interior. So, you know, my life is full of this rich content, but the vast majority of people are living, you know, they say something like 70 to 80% of teenagers are what we'd call chronically disengaged, you know, which means not really excited about anything, not really super fascinated or interested by much. This is a huge problem. And this is true for adults as well, you know, that there's this, I had a friend call it weapons of mass distraction, that, you know, it's become about work, internet, TV, sleep, eat, work, internet, TV, sleep, work, internet, TV. Now, I don't want to be too far in that. Everybody has family and love, and you know, everybody has the ability to have meaning in their lives. But I do think that we could do better at re-enchanting our world, at bringing in creativity, imagination, speculation, art, culture, science, you know, and I do think that when we pay attention to these things, synchronicities happen more often. And my taking off my scientist hat and putting on my other human being hat, you know, I believe that when that happens, it's the universe sort of telling us, like, yes, you're on the right track. You know, like, if I turn my attention toward how I can help people, if I turn my attention toward what I can explore, follow my fascination, ask questions from of people that I don't understand, rather than judging them or condemning them, what you'll notice is over time, you'll be more in touch with this, both your individual reality and the interconnected reality, because both are true, at least during the time we're alive in this world. I remember a quote from Suzuki Roshi, and it was very simple in true Zen fashion. It said, not two, not one. Not two, not one. And we believe what he meant by that was, we are not separate. We are not separate. We are all interconnected, interdependent, and we have an individual self, and we are. And having the connection between those two and being able to navigate seamlessly between the two and dance with the interconnected nature of reality and my individual purpose is part of the purpose of life, you know? And so I feel like when we're seamlessly transitioning between those two ways of being and between the internal and external, we'll have more of these coincidences and synchronicities saying, yeah, you're getting it, you got it, you know?
Precisely what I am doing. Precisely what I am doing. How to be able to hold in mind that we're part of something, a oneness, and that we also have our individuality. And we have such polarity built into us with dark and light, sun and moon, and black and white. We have that. It has to be one or the other in this world, and it's built into us to it's survival to notice that there are polarities, but to be able to put the two together.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I think first, for me, the platform originally is mindfulness because, you know, the mind, so the way our minds, the way we think is only one mode of being, and it's only one source of information. Now, the way we have trained our children and ourselves right now in the history of our world is that the mind is dominant. The mind is the most important. People might even say it's the only important thing is how we think about things, but the mind is actually quite limited. It knows how to categorize, it knows how to compare, it knows how to plan, it knows how to reflect, it knows how to simulate, it knows how to tell stories. These are all amazing, like they're all up here in the frontal cortex, right? Plan, reflect, simulate, all of these things. But that is only one mode. There's another mode of being, of feeling, of intuiting. There's visceral and kinesthetic intelligence. There's gut intelligence. And all of these forms of knowledge, for many, are like atrophied muscles. You know, it's like, I think Sir Ken Robinson said, you know, that many see the body as a vehicle to carry their brain around, you know, to carry their mind around. So all of the practices that we recommend engaging in, spiritual practices, transformative practices, creativity, earthing, forest bathing, time, and, you know, hundreds of them are meant to try to create a connection between the inner world, the spiritual world, and the physical or thinking mind world, the logical world. You know, we used to say you have to spend more time in your right brain, you know, or you have to develop your corpus callosum so you're more, you know, now they know it's not really living. That's a little oversimplified, but it was still the same idea. Like, we've got to spend more time in the being mode and the wondering and awe and exploration and feeling mode, in addition to the thinking, logic, categorizing, comparing, dualistic mode. The more time we spend in these other territories, the more we can seamlessly move between these different modes of being and have a much more complete understanding of ourselves and the world.
Yeah, and right now, today, and talking with you particularly, but a little bit has been going on, I am seeing inside of me a very large burst of anxiety. I can feel it as we're talking. I'm really caught up with how you're talking, but this anxiety in me has disturbed my sleep, raised my blood pressure at night. And it's a curious thing to be happening, particularly now. And it's happening now, partly because my book is going to get published. I have done the work, now it's marketing. Partly this coincidence project is taken off right now. I mean, we're going to get a website that it's real now. It wasn't,
Mhm.
I imagined something like this with somebody,
Yeah.
and there it is. And they're doing it more and more without me.
Yeah.
The book doesn't need me.
Hmm.
My younger son has needed some financial support. He's not going to need that anymore. So I think my anxiety is telling me, where do you go with this now? Well,
Mm.
you're like adrift now, because
Mm.
feeling needs has been such a thing for
Mm.
you, and
Mm.
there's nobody who needs me. There doesn't
Haha.
in the way that it did before, because I liked imagining and then helping it happen.
Yeah.
But here I am, a guy who's imagined running for the opening kickoff for a touchdown, hitting the first pitch for a home run, both in big games.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience of being president of student council in 6th grade.
Hmm.
But I could like imagine that and do the campaign. So I can imagine. And now I've left with nothing to imagine of the
Hmm.
ways that I have done it before. What do
Yeah. And I think you're not alone in that. There are many, many people, first of all, in the process of growing older. This is a common thing that happens for people, that they're like, okay, so it's all been about manifesting or caring for. What the heck do I do now? Now that I've manifested, now that I've launched everybody, what is it now? But also everyone, I mean, especially post-pandemic, where people did get very shifted in their understanding of, wait, I don't have to actually commute into work every day and sit at a desk all day long, and I might never have to do that again. Or guess what? Everyone in my family doesn't have to work full time. If we all collaborate, a couple of us cannot have to work that way. And there's been huge seismic shifts in and the negatives: anxiety, fear, depression, feeling very disconnected, not being able to see grandparents and loved ones, and touch other people and be in the room with other people. And I think people shouldn't underestimate the level of abnormality that is. Like, we have been in a very abnormal state for the last 2 years of disconnection, as well as having tons of time for creative opportunity and different things for different people. So it's a real turning point. And yeah, so what do you think? The one thing that comes to mind for me with you is you're leaving a legacy with this project. And do people move into kind of a bigger picture, more patterned thinking, mentoring role? Or is there any other legacy left that you need to build, and spending more time in your imagination? Here's one thing I'd say is, sometimes we think of imagining something as kind of like a vision board, right? So we say, what do I want to envision in my future? What are the things I want? And then we lock onto them and we try to make them manifest. And that can be really useful. But it also can be very useful to open our imaginations as wide as possible and wait for an idea to come knocking that wants to be born through us. So we open our realm of possibility. We say, okay, I'm ready for an idea to come through me. And Elizabeth Gilbert is, the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and also some really amazingly even better novels. She says ideas have spirits, and they run around looking for people to manifest them, and they knock on people's doors. And, if you're open and one knocks on your door, you better be careful, because if you make a commitment to it, it's like getting married, sort of, and you have a responsibility to carry it through. So maybe it's this sort of open, receptive imagination is also a form of imagination.
I have a quote like that from her in my Meaningful Coincidence book, because I believe the psychosphere exists and the ideas are floating around in there.
Right.
And if you don't grab it, too, the other side of that, if you don't
Yeah.
grab it, then somebody else is going to do
That's
it.
right. Yes. Yeah. And
that-
she had this great coincidence. I mean, did you hear the story that she had of having this fully formed novel that she wrote down most of the pieces of in a prospectus. Then she got distracted and never finished it. And she had a colleague and they wrote the novel, the same novel. And she called them and said, I have to share these few pages with you that I wrote. I mean, it's exactly what you wrote.
That's the one that I've got
Yeah.
in my book.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the one. And it's to illustrate the ideas floating around.
Mhm.
What I appreciate very much from you, and we have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
What I appreciate very
Bernard,
much.
can I pause this for 1 minute? I have an unexpected visitor. Just 1 minute.
Okay, let me pause this thing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
As we were talking about the ideas being out there, that I appreciate your putting me in context, because I tend to be very introspective and think in my own mind, but I need to be able to get out of myself more. When you're saying open up your mind, and what I've been trying to tell you some about in the post I'm writing is about this collective human organism and suicide. It's like being a psychiatrist for the planet, because I am thinking about a psychotherapy for the collective human organism.
I love that. What would it be? What would it consist of?
It consists of starting with the stages of change, Prochaska, Di Clementi,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
where the people are in a pre-contemplative stage.
yeah,
And the first step is to get them to do like alcoholics, to
yeah,
say, I'm an alcoholic, to be able to
yeah.
move from that, to say, I'm a greedy materialist, to be able to say, that's
Yeah.
me. And that's a big, big step.
Yeah.
There's so many reasons to want to keep going the same way, but
Mhm.
that's the beginning of it. And then the rest of it has to do with developing a collective self-observer, much like the individual ones,
Yes.
where we're looking at the human mind collectively and trying to be able to imagine a future for
Yeah.
humanity.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Well, that's what I have in mind, but that's somehow not enough. Somehow this anxiety is like it's cultural. It's what's going on right now. It's almost
Yes,
like I've
it
been
is.
exposed to what the anxiety that's out there, because I don't
Yeah.
have all my things that I'm doing.
Yeah.
That to see my younger son being able to take control of his life after so many years of not, and my older son doing fine with his family,
Yeah.
that there's this kind of existential angst of like,
Yes.
what is this that I'm
Yeah.
going to do?
Well, in your phrasing, then it's almost like we are, humanity is in a midlife crisis. You know, humanity is in a midlife crisis, and we have one of our research on how people transform their lives to lives that are more rich and meaningful and service oriented, altruistic, empathic, compassionate, joy filled, is that, you know, people have oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. People run into crisis and they have a branching point. So they can either become constricted, more fearful, more anxious, more negative, or they can kind of expand. And so one of the things I recommend to you and your listeners when you feel this way is to literally put yourself in front of large vistas, open your aperture, do things that force your peripheral vision to open wide, that open your heart. So it could be going to an ocean, it could be going to a forest, going to a place that has a large view. Even on a television or a screen, you can expose yourself to this kind of imagery. If you have a virtual reality headset, you can go into virtual reality and be anywhere in space in front of the Grand Canyon and do some of your open awareness practices there. Because what sometimes needs to happen is an internal spaciousness. So usually when we get anxious, we narrow we try to figure it out. We try to logic it, or we try to ruminate about it and go over things over and over again. When really what we need is to dial it open. We need to dilate, and then just be. And just be for as long as it takes for an image to come, or a metaphor, or a story. This is what you could call intentional coincidence, that you don't wait for a coincidence to hit you. You intentionally open yourself to meaningful information coming to you.
I have a set of trees, 3 of them, that I go visit every other week pretty much.
Yeah.
And I've had dialogues with them.
That's great.
We have
Yeah.
conversations. But for the first time, last time, I meditated somewhere near there. I hadn't done that before. So I think you're telling me that's, I want to do that again. You're encouraging me to do that, because you're right about your mind that gets freer out there in the forest.
Yeah.
It's like, they talked to me. The forest kicked me out of there one time because I was too much thinking about it. I've had a lot of adventures in that forest with those trees. But this anxiety is interesting now. It's like, it's like, to be explored, because as we end, I will suggest to you that in times of transition, life transition, high emotion and need, coincidences are more likely to happen.
I agree. Yeah, especially if you intentionally stay open.
Especially, so I think I might just do that.
Great. Well, what a pleasure to talk to you, Bernard. Thank you.
You're welcome, Cassie. I love doing imagination with you. Imagination is funny. It makes a rainy day sunny. It's an old song. So
I love
thank
it.
you. So thank you for bringing some sunshine into my life.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.